The Cornish Mystery. It was on a dreary evening in early October when Detective Alaric Stax Croft, that paragon of quiet eccentricity and keen intellect, returned to his quarters at 221B Baker Street after a day of listless contemplation. The case that had occupied his attention for weeks had finally been resolved, a trivial matter of blackmail that scarcely warranted the energy he had devoted to it. As he entered the sitting room, a sleek ginger cat with intelligent green eyes rose from its perch on the back of his favorite armchair and rubbed affectionately against his leg, purring loudly. This was Tiger, a creature who had simply appeared on their doorstep one damp morning a year ago and had since adopted Stax with single-minded devotion. "Ah, Tiger, my fine fellow," Stax murmured, bending to stroke the cat's head. Tiger responded by dropping a small, unfortunate mouse, his latest offering, neatly onto the rug. "Not again, Tiger." I sighed, already anticipating the inevitable complaint from Mrs. Gable next door. Tiger, utterly unrepentant, merely Tiger's offering. Like truth itself, Fawkes, unembellished clarity is always superior to ornate deception. Tiger understands this too, you see. He goes directly for the quarry, no unnecessary ornamentation. I had grown accustomed to these philosophical pronouncements during our years of shared lodgings at 221B Baker Street. This modest address had become something of a pilgrimage site for those with peculiar problems. Drawn by Croft's growing reputation for solving mysteries that confounded conventional authorities, one couldn't help but feel, observing Stax at work at this famous address, that he was perhaps the latest manifestation of a particular strain of intellectual fire that had, for generations, flickered between the hallowed halls of the Yard and these very private rooms. A kind of distant, eccentric brilliance running in a bloodline known for chasing shadows and unraveling the most Gordian of knots. Many clients, upon first entering our sitting room, would be startled by the blue haze that perpetually hung near the ceiling, the accumulated evidence of Croft's thinking process. They might also be startled by Tiger, usually asleep but prone to sudden, silent appearances. "Ah, there goes Stax again," the yardmen would jest whenever they spotted the plumes of smoke rising from our window. The nickname had followed him since his early days with the police, when a young constable observed that Croft at work resembled nothing so much as a factory chimney in full production. The sobriquet had stuck, though few dared use it to his face. Only Inspector Blackwood employed it with impunity, an old friend permitted liberties others were not. And of course, Mrs. Hudson. The mantelpiece was already clouded with pipe smoke when our housekeeper announced the arrival of a telegram. By the light of a sputtering candle, Croft read aloud to me, his faithful if perpetually bewildered companion, Gideon Fawkes, the brief summons that had arrived from Cornwall. "Urgent presence requested at Trenwith Castle. Terrible misfortune aboard yacht. Will send carriage to station. Lady Eleanor Strathmore." Croft calmly folded the telegram, eyes sharp as polished flint. A wreath of white smoke encircled his head as he drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the tendrils rising and fading against the ceiling beams like ephemeral thoughts made visible. Age. Intriguing, he remarked, fastening his cloak with untroubled ease. He tapped his pipe gently against the hearth, watching the ashes fall. He then reached into his waistcoat pocket and drew out an object I knew well. An old, heavy silver pocket watch, its case intricately engraved but worn smooth in places by years of handling. He didn't open it to check the time, but instead held it in his palm, turning it over, his brow furrowed in thought. I knew he wasn't just admiring the craftsmanship, he was using the watch, in some inexplicable way, as a tactile tool for calibrating the timelines forming in his mind. The telegram arrived at 7:14, he murmured, not to me but to himself, his eyes distant. The yacht, terrible misfortune, must have occurred earlier. How much earlier? Need to factor in notification, summoning the carriage. Hours, certainly. Perhaps a day. The density of time. The sequence. He closed the watch case with a soft click and returned it to his pocket. Yet I suspect it is merely the beginning, he continued, addressing me properly now. The truth, like good smoke, often emerges gradually, first obscured, then crystalline. And like a finely tuned watch, the timing of each event will be crucial. We must observe the gears, forks, not just the hands on the face. He took one last wistful glance around our 221B Baker Street sanctuary, where so many perplexing cases had been unraveled through the patient application of reason, often with Tiger curled nearby and the tick-tock of a mental timeline driving his thoughts, before we departed into the foggy London night. We arrived at dawn, the mist still clinging desperately to the Cornish hills. Trenwith Castle loomed grandly but grimly above us, ivy strangling ancient stone. Lady Eleanor herself, draped in widow's black, greeted us urgently. Despite her mourning attire, I could not help but notice her rings, several expensive jewels adorning pale fingers, and how she twisted them nervously as she spoke. "Thank heavens you've come," she breathed. "My husband, Lord Strathmore, found dead upon his yacht, the Silver Gull. A residue from what came before, like charting a new timeline," he added, drawing deeply and releasing a perfect ring of white smoke that hung momentarily in the damp air. At 221B Baker Street, I often find answers in the patterns of rising smoke, chaos gradually resolving into order, much like the process of deduction itself, and timing providing brief respite from her grief. A professional hazard, Croft admitted with a small smile. My colleagues claim they can track my movements through London by following the smoke signals, though I find they are often misled by false trails. Much like following a sequence of events, it is the precise timing of each step that reveals the true path. He patted his waistcoat pocket, a subtle gesture towards the pocket watch within. Along the path to the cliffs, we encountered a stern-faced gentleman Smoke speaks to the depth of contemplation, Croft observed mildly, producing another enormous puff that momentarily obscured his features entirely. And yet all pipes, humble or grand, eventually reveal their contents through the smoke they produce. If you'll excuse the metaphor, I find human affairs follow similar principles. Many an evening at 221 B. Baker Street has been spent watching smoke dissipate. Marked at a page about hidden treasures. He stooped suddenly, retrieving something from beneath a small side table. "What is it, Croft?" I asked, accustomed to navigating the smoke signals that often preceded his most significant discoveries. "A receipt," he replied, studying the small paper carefully. "From the Penzance Bank. Lord Strathmore withdrew a substantial sum 3 days ago." He pulled out his pocket watch, flipped open the case not to check the time, but to access a tiny, almost imperceptible set of markings, or perhaps just to ground himself in the concept of precise measurement. 3 days, he repeated softly, running a thumb over the watch face. Placed against the discovery, the murder, the arrival of the telegram. The gears are beginning to mesh, Fawkes. The timeline is forming. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened. "I was not aware," she stammered. "James handled all our finances." "Indeed?" Croft's gaze lingered on her for a moment. He tapped his pipe. In moments had restored the cabin's foggy condition, much to Lady Eleanor's evident discomfort. From the yacht we journeyed inland, traversing green slopes until reaching the warmth of the Trenwith Library, heavy with ancient tomes. Here the deceased lay peacefully beneath a shroud. A young man stood vigil by the window, tall, with Lord Strathmore's same aquiline nose, but softer features. "My stepson, Thomas," Lady Eleanor introduced us, her tone carefully neutral. Thomas Strathmore nodded solemnly. "I arrived from Oxford only this morning. I still cannot believe father is gone." His gaze fixed momentarily on Croft, who was already reaching for his pipe. "You must be the detective they call Stacks. Father mentioned reading of your exploits in the Times." The library's air was thick with the scent of old leather and beeswax. Croft produced his pipe once more, and Thomas gestured permission. The detective struck a match, drawing deeply until the tobacco glowed. The familiar ritual seemed to transport him momentarily back to 221 B. Baker Street. where so many mysteries had resolved themselves in the quiet contemplation of swirling smoke patterns against the ceiling, driven by the internal clockwork of his mind. He was, I knew, already placing Thomas's arrival into the timeline. This morning, how did that fit with the discovery? Within minutes, the library windows had fogged with the output of Croft's industrious smoking, the shelves of books appearing to recede into a mysterious haze that mirrored the obscurity of the case itself. Most curious, Croft noted, gently revealing the late lord's face as smoke drifted above them like spectral witnesses. The dagger is Turkish in origin, rather incongruous with our nautical setting. He paused, pulling out his pocket watch again, holding it loosely. The timing of the murder, the timing of the dagger's presence, these points must align. The museum, Lady Eleanor gasped, waving ineffectually at the cloud surrounding Croft. My husband was patron to the local museum. Perhaps. Precisely, Croft interjected smoothly, producing another billowing exhalation that momentarily obscured his face entirely, leaving only his sharp eyes visible through the fog. He slipped the watch back into his pocket with a quiet click. To the museum. Croft stopped dead, his pipe momentarily forgotten in his hand. 3 nights ago, he repeated softly, pulling out his pocket watch and flipping it open. His eyes weren't on the curator, but seemed fixed on an invisible point in ago, and the murder. He ran a finger along the rim of the watch case as if calibrating a complex calculation. 3 nights ago, he confirmed, his voice tight with sudden focus, the same day as the withdrawal from the Penzance Bank. The timeline is clarifying. What was taken? Croft asked sharply, closing the watch and returning it to his pocket. That's the peculiar thing, Hardwick replied, leading us through the displays. Only 2 items, an antique Turkish dagger from our Ottoman collection and, he hesitated, an original naval chart from Captain Bartholomew Trelawney's voyages. Hardly our most valuable artifacts. Croft walked thoughtfully through the exhibits, his manner deceptively idle. The gentle curls of smoke from his now relit pipe seemed to illuminate rather than obscure the displays, as if highlighting elements invisible to ordinary perception. How often at 221 B. Baker Street had I observed him in this same state, seemingly passive but intensely observant, his mind arranging facts into patterns as elegant as the smoke rings he occasionally produced, constantly checking the timing and sequence of each discovered piece against the others. As we progressed through the museum, Croft's prolific smoking had created such an atmosphere that other visitors turned to stare, some with irritation, others with amusement. I see now why they call him Stax, I overheard one elderly gentleman whisper to his companion. The man's a walking chimney, quite extraordinary. He paused at a dusty naval display depicting ancient sea voyages, where an empty frame marked the stolen chart's absence. The cloud around him had grown so substantial that Professor Hardwick opened a nearby window, coughing politely. Trelawney, Croft mused, drawing slowly on his pipe with such vigor that a fresh plume erupted around his head. He pulled out his pocket watch, turning it over. The name is familiar. Was he not rumoured to have encountered the Turkish corsair Mehmet Suleiman somewhere off these very shores? And is the timing of their encounter precisely documented? Professor Hardwick's eyebrows shot up. Indeed. Legend has it they battled fiercely, though some locals claim they eventually formed an alliance. Suleiman's treasure is one of Cornwall's most enduring myths, supposedly hidden on a tiny island visible only at the lowest tides. The timing of the tides, of course, is crucial. Fawkes, observe this display, Croft instructed, indicating a collection of relics. Notice anything peculiar about this narrative of Trelawney's encounters? I studied the placard, squinting slightly through the haze. Only that Lord Strathmore contributed many of the items himself. Quite so, he replied cryptically, smiling faintly through the veil of pipe smoke. He tucked the watch away. And when did his lordship develop this particular interest? The timing of this obsession is significant. Only these past 6 months, Hardwick answered. He became quite obsessed with Trelawney's journals and charts. After departing the museum, Croft suggested we explore the castle grounds and surrounding hillside. We trekked along winding paths where he occasionally paused, examining footprints and bits of fabric caught upon thorny bushes. His pipe remained his constant companion, the white smoke seeming to guide him like a divining rod toward evidence, reminding me of countless investigations that had begun with quiet contemplation at 221 B. Baker Street. On a distant hill, spotting the moving cloud that accompanied our progress, raised his hand in cheerful greeting, apparently mistaking Croft's smoky aura for a signal fire. "A fine smoke signal," he called out cheerfully. Near a secluded cove, he discovered fresh boot prints, leading to and from the water. Kneeling to examine them, he placed his pipe carefully on a nearby rock, the smoke rising straight upward in the still air. "See how the smoke rises, Fawkes? Undisturbed, direct, true. When a path is equally direct, one must take notice," he observed. He pulled out his pocket watch, opening it and holding it near the prints. "These prints are fresh, but layered. Someone has been making nighttime excursions by sea, quite regularly, judging by the multiple overlapping prints. And the timing of the tides here must be precise for access." He closed the watch with a soft click. At 221 B. Baker Street, I often study the movement of smoke through still air. The most minute disturbance indicates a hidden current, just as these prints indicate a hidden purpose. And the sequence of those disturbances tells the story. Upon returning to the castle, we encountered Lord Thomas in heated conversation with a beautiful young woman. They fell silent as we approached. Said stiffly, "May I present Miss Catherine Winters, daughter of my father's solicitor and my fiancée?" "A pleasure," Croft bowed slightly, "though I gather your engagement faces certain obstacles." The young woman flushed. "My Interesting that your father should be so concerned with the family's financial standing," Croft remarked, his eyes resting thoughtfully on her. He didn't touch his watch, but I knew his mind was considering the solicitor's earlier dismissal of the private investigation. "Tell me, Miss Winters, when did Lord Strathmore last visit your father's office?" She replied without hesitation. He was unusually cheerful, insisting that all their financial troubles would soon be resolved. "3 days ago," Croft repeated softly, a small, almost imperceptible nod confirming that this detail fit precisely into the timeline he was constructing. The bank withdrawal, the museum break-in, Lord Strathmore's cheerfulness. It was all coalescing around that date. Later, as servants prepared dinner, Croft conducted subtle inquiries regarding Lord Strathmore's recent behaviour. The elderly butler revealed that his lordship had been making frequent solo excursions on his yacht, always returning exhausted but excited. He showed me the butler's pantry, pulling out his pocket watch and timing the swing of a pendulum clock hanging there. The rhythm of the household, he explained quietly. It helps calibrate the disruption caused by an event out of sync. Lord Strathmore's excursions were a disruption. And Lady Eleanor? Croft inquired casually, relighting his pipe in the servants' quarters where formality was relaxed. The kitchen maid giggled as she observed the immediate transformation. As we gathered, he sat by the window, methodically cleaning his pipe with a slender instrument he carried expressly for this purpose. A detective's instrument must remain unobstructed, he commented to the room at large as eager hands opened windows. Winters announced pompously. As I suspected, the estate is in ruins. However, he added with visible surprise, there appears to be a recent deposit of £5,000 into his lordship's account, source unspecified, deposited 3 days ago. Croft packed fresh tobacco into his newly cleaned pipe, struck a match, and drew until the tobacco caught. The ritual seemed to center the room's attention on him, the fragrant smoke creating an atmosphere of expectation. He would suddenly announce the solution to a seemingly impenetrable mystery, often after a period of intense concentration involving his pocket watch. He pulled the watch from his pocket, holding it up slightly, its face catching the firelight. His eyes weren't on the watch, but seemed to be looking through it, at the intricate clockwork of the crime's timeline that only he could see. With his first deep inhalation, such a prodigious cloud emerged that one of the constables muttered audibly, "By heaven, they weren't exaggerating about Stacks, Croft." "The case solves itself neatly," he declared softly, setting down his teacup as smoke continued to billow around him like storm clouds gathering. He tapped the watch face lightly. "If one observes the inconspicuous. The timing, you see, is everything. The sequence of events tells the true story if you can only read it." "But how?" Lady Eleanor asked, her knuckles white against her black dress. "The key," Croft explained, gesturing with his pipe, smoke swirling artfully around his hand, while his other hand gently turned the pocket watch in his palm, "lies neither aboard the yacht nor with the dagger itself, but rather within the connection between the museum theft and Lord Strathmore's newfound wealth. His lordship, through studied research of Trelawney's journals, discovered the location of Suleiman's treasure, hidden not on an island, but in a sea cave accessible only at certain tides. The time where the purity of his clay pipe smoke seemed to distill complicated truths into their simplest form, helped by the silent ticking of his mental clockwork. But because your financial desperation had reached its peak, your jewelry is impressive, but clearly pawned and redeemed multiple times. Note the subtle abrasions on the settings. You discovered your husband's secret, but knew he would never relinquish the treasure quickly enough to save you from your creditors. Only meant to take the map from the museum. To secure my future. I went 3 nights ago, she confessed, confirming Croft's timeline. When he caught me aboard the yacht that night, he flew into a rage. He threatened to expose me. I panicked. She trailed off, sobbing. You took the dagger from the museum to implicate fictional thieves. Croft concluded softly, his pipe now resting quietly in his hand. Premeditated, but no less final for Lord Strathmore. The timing of your visit to the museum, Lady Eleanor. She killed my father for money while I was away studying, he said bitterly, all while pretending poverty. Catherine's father was right about this family. Not entirely, Croft corrected, tapping out his pipe against a brass ashtray. Your stepmother spoke truly about your father's financial irresponsibility. But Mr. Winters's concern about your engagement had nothing to do with protecting his daughter from a bankrupt family. Croft looked directly at the solicitor who had edged toward the door during the revelations. He pulled out his pocket watch one last time, holding it loosely. You knew about the treasure too, didn't you? Lord Strathmore consulted you about its legal implications. You realized its value and planned to acquire it yourself, which explains why you've been so eager to examine his lordship's papers before anyone else could. You sought the remaining clues to the treasure's location. You were watching the timing closely, weren't you, a different kind of hunt, but just as vital. As we boarded the London-bound train the following morning, I noticed a wistful expression cross my friend's features as he gazed out at the Cornish landscape receding behind us. You know, Fawkes, he mused, lighting his freshly packed pipe, the smoke swirling lazily in the compartment. He pulled out his pocket watch. A fleeting moment in the vast clockwork of existence. I watched as the smoke from his clay pipe rose and danced in the private compartment, forming curious shapes that seemed, to his practiced eye, to contain all the mysteries and solutions of our curious world, each wisp aligning with the invisible gears of time turning in his mind. The porter passing by our compartment paused in momentary alarm at the thick haze, then smiled in recognition. "Ah, Mr. Croft heading back to London," he remarked to a colleague. "Better telegraph Baker Street. Stax is on his way home. And tell Mrs. Hudson to hide the mice. His cats probably missed him." By the time we reached 221B Baker Street, where so many puzzles had found their resolution, I knew another enigma would soon present itself, and Croft's pipe would once again fill our chambers with the pure smoke of contemplation, billowing around his head like the workings of his extraordinary mind made visible, the silent tick-tock of his mental timeline keeping perfect time. And waiting on the doorstep, likely with a new gift, would be Tiger, the other great rat-catcher of 221B Baker Street.